This is a CBS News special report. I'm John Dickerson. Music mogul Sean Diddy Combs was just sentenced to more than 4 years in prison. The 55-year-old was convicted back in July on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Combs had pleaded not guilty to all charges and was acquitted of 2 more serious charges, sex trafficking and racketeering, which would have led to a potential life sentence. Moments before he was sentenced, Combs apologized for his disgusting, shameful, and sick behavior. Those are his characterizations. Our Jerika Duncan is outside the courthouse. Jerika has covered this case from the beginning. Jerika, your thoughts?
This was the most important day of this case, and Combs did give a statement about 12 minutes long where he spoke directly to the court. He talked about being personally responsible and apologized for what happened with his ex-girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and Jane. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and he said moments ago, I want to personally apologize to all of the victims of domestic violence. He said, quote, I hate myself right now. I was stripped to nothing. And when it comes to that video of him beating Cassie, he said, I was sick on drugs. I was out of control. I needed help. I make no excuses. I knew better. But the judge had some very sharp words in response to Combs. He acknowledged that he is trying to do better and told him that he hopes that he continues that, but instantly went into rejecting attempts to characterize what happened as, quote, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He said you abused your power and control you had over women you claimed you had loved. You abused them emotionally and physically. He said the evidence was massive. I was sitting right here, he said. We read it and we saw it. Images of gashes and bruises and broken doors, and I saw it in the video. It was savage. This is according to the judge. This is some of the comments that he made just moments ago in court. Alice Gaynor from WCBS is in the courtroom right now and sending out notes just to give us a sense of what Combs' demeanor is like right now. What is his family reacting to? I also want to note something that the judge mentioned in reference to Jane. She went by the pseudonym Jane, but this was also an ex-girlfriend. He said he referred to the brutal assault of Jane by saying, you kicked down 5 doors in her home, lifted her off the floor by her neck, punched her, kicked her, dragged her by her hair, slapped her so hard she fell down. Jane, quote, her credibility testified to those things, that she was a credible witness. So some sharp words, again, from the judge who just handed down that sentence, 50 months in prison. There will be time served, we believe, in consideration of that. So considering that, it might actually be 4 years. I'm just looking at a note, sentence is 50 months of incarceration. Agnifilo, which is the lead attorney for Combs, asking for more time to list facility recommendations. Also supervised release, 5 years. No reaction from Combs. He is still sitting, and there's a $500,000 fine. You can see behind me a little bit the crowd that has been gathered here pretty much all day as the family had been in and out of that courtroom. When I asked a couple of the defense attorneys how they were feeling today, they didn't have a comment. This day was very serious. They knew that going in. Not long ago in July, when it was that split verdict, they said this was a win for Combs. But the second part of that, the most important part of that, is the sentencing happening today. Again, the judge sentencing him to 50 months behind bars.
Jerika, what other activity did we have today? Did we hear there were the victim statements? Was this a part of today's activities? And also, did the judge make any characterization of the final sentence relative to those harsh words that you that you quoted him as saying? In other words, did he match the two up? Did he say, I'm delivering this very harsh characterological verdict on you, and the sentencing matches that, or did he just not make that connection?
No, he did acknowledge that the sentence that prosecutors were asking for, 11 years, was a bit of an overreach. The probation report recommended 60 months. So when you look at the probation report of 60 months, he comes up with 50 months. The prosecutors wanted 11 years behind bars. It's not quite in the middle, but it's a far cry from the 14 months that the defense was asking for. Some other things worth noting. Combs was found guilty on the 2 counts of the Mann Act. This is transportation of people across state lines for the purpose of prostitution, and that is illegal in this country. Prosecutor Christy Slavic at one point during this testimony said that this case was not just about prostitution, but violence. She emphasized the violence. And that is what we heard a little bit from the judge today when he recanted some of the testimony that we heard during the trial. Cassie Ventura, the star witness, the ex-girlfriend of Combs, who was with him for about 10 years, released a statement before this sentencing was handed down saying, "I am so scared that if he walks free, his first actions will be swift retribution towards me and others who spoke about him at this trial."
All right, Jerika Duncan, thank you so much. Criminal defense attorney Caroline Polisi is with us. Caroline, what's your reaction to this judgment?
I think this is about as good of a sentence that Sean Combs and his lawyers could have hoped for. They did ask for 14 months, which is essentially time served. But when probation came in with that assessment, which was 60 months to 72 months, clearly the judge took that into consideration. Now, he downwardly departed from that, meaning I think two things are to note here that you heard the judge say there. One is that a sentence should be sufficient but not greater than necessary to achieve the ends of justice. And so you'll often hear defense attorneys saying that. The second is that similarly situated defendants, you want no discrepancies in similarly situated defendants. When you look at all of the Mann Act guilty verdicts sort of in this jurisdiction, this is a pretty high sentence. And so I think the judge didn't want to get out of that heartland of the sentences while taking into account the violence here. That's the biggest issue here.
Well, right. So on the one hand, you're saying Joe Schmo comes in, has a Mann Act violation. You want the sentences to be the same to hold up that important judicial principle that all people are. On the other hand, the judge, as Jerika went through, went on at some length about all of this other material and all of the stuff the judge mentioned. Is that a part of the Mann Act charge, or is that...
Interesting. So it's not. So remember, it was a huge win for his defense when he was acquitted of those sex trafficking charge, which is essentially a Mann Act charge with the element of violence. And the defense actually raised a constitutional argument here in their brief saying that, look, if you consider that conduct, the violence, the coercion that was presented by the prosecution, that's actually going against what the sentencing guidelines recommend or state, that you can't consider acquitted conduct. Essentially, he was found not guilty of that conduct, so why consider it in the sentence? The judge setting some precedent here, saying, absolutely, I can consider the evidence that was produced at trial. It's not necessarily going against those acquittals. There was obviously evidence of violence here. You can take into account his character, his demeanor. This has always been a tale of two different Sean Combs. The defense wants to portray him as, you know, a lost man who has trauma issues since his father was murdered at the age of 3, with addiction issues, struggling to get by. The prosecution paints him as sort of a nefarious, devious, really serial perpetrator of violence.
So in the end here, you mentioned that the defense team will be happy with this verdict.
Oh, well, look, I mean, they wanted him to walk out. I think Agnifilo said, you know, today we want to walk out. I think they may appeal on the constitutional grounds, on the grounds that they're going to say that the judge took into account this acquitted conduct and that they should only be looking at the actual violations of the Mann Act.
So just to catch people up with that, so if it comes out in trial that you did X, Y, and Z, but you are then acquitted of the charges in which that information came out, the defense's argument will be the judge can't take that into consideration.
Exactly.
Even though it was talked about and everybody knows about it, can't do it. That would be their grounds.
Exactly, because you weren't found guilty of that offense. They haven't proven it by beyond a reasonable doubt. However, forever, sentencing judges can take into account prior bad acts if they find by a preponderance of the evidence that those were committed. And so it's kind of a gray area there. But clearly this judge did take those factors into account to some degree, but then mitigated it as well to keep it within those, to keep things a little bit more consistent in terms of, similarly situated defendants.
All right, Caroline Polisi, thank you. CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman was inside the overflow courtroom as the sentencing was read and is now outside for us. Katrina, what did you make? What's your reaction? What did you witness?
I mean, what was striking when the sentence was finally read is how still Sean Combs was. He just sat there, his hands clasped, looking down, and it was such a contrast to earlier because I would say it was such an emotional day in that courtroom. When Sean Combs' kids spoke in court today, they were all crying. His lawyer, Nicole Westmoreland, was crying. Sean Combs got up there and said his own words, and his voice was really shaking. He was very emotional as he told the judge how this had affected his life, how he felt like a changed man. And even when the judge read this sentence, he began by praising Sean Combs, by talking about the work that he's done, the barriers that he's broken, how impressive it is, even at a young age, having lost his father, all that he overcome. But he said that all of that could not wash away the record of this case, the evidence that we saw in that courtroom. He also pointed to the fact that some of this aggravating behavior, the violence, took place even after Combs already knew that he was being investigated. And after that Intercontinental video that we've seen so many times, Sean Combs posted this apology on Instagram. The judge said, saying a lot of what he said in the courtroom today, and yet even after that, he beat one of the women who testified in this trial. So the judge was just not convinced that his behavior had changed, and he said that this had to be done for deterrence. And Sean Combs just really sat there looking defeated. He told us in court today that he was broken. He looked absolutely distraught when his kids were speaking earlier. He was crying. He was wiping his face with a tissue. And you can see really how all of this has affected him. And now he is going to have to deal with this incarceration.
And in the judge's remarks, you mentioned that, Katrina, that he started off and he sort of had a trail of the way he. How long did he speak for? And was he pretty much monotone the whole way, or did the judge betray any emotion in his remarks?
No, I would say that there absolutely was, and I can't say how long because he was actually still speaking as I left the courtroom. He was praising the women who came and testified in this trial and the courage that it took for them to do that as I walked out. But you could absolutely hear emotion in his voice when he was talking about all of the things that Sean Combs has accomplished. You could tell that, he is very impressed by all that he has done, by the work that he is continuing to try to do in the prison system. But all of that just was not enough to overcome the massive amount of evidence that he said we saw in this case, the violence, the extreme nature of the behavior, the length of this behavior. It happened over a decade with multiple victims, and all of that just was not enough to supersede him saying that he now feels remorseful for this, that he is repentant. And earlier in the day, the judge also said that he just wasn't fully convinced by the narrative that Sean Combs and his team have been saying.
CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman, thank you. We want to go back to Jerika Duncan, who's outside the courthouse. Jerika, there are always in these high-profile trials people who gather around, who kind of come and pick sides. What has the reaction been in the wake of this sentencing?
I think you have people that have been out here, some that support Combs and are saying things like free Diddy, and then you have folks who are advocates and wanted to see him face some serious time. An attorney that I did speak to did make clear, though, that a lot of times in these federal cases, people don't necessarily serve the entire time. So again, Combs has already been behind bars for a little over a year. Then there's, I was told, 15% off for good behavior, sometimes 15% off the sentence. There's First Step Act credits to consider. There's a certain percentage that you can do for halfway house or home confinement and possibly additional time off for drug treatment programs. So in the end, we don't know exactly what that really looks like in terms of how much more time Combs will spend behind bars. But again, this judge trying to send a message saying that what he did was wrong and that he did believe the credibility of those women who testified. Court just adjourned, but I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts from the judge. He looks over at Combs and says, you are going to get through this. There is light at the end to help people like him. You will have a chance, he says, to show your children and the world that accountability and change is possible.
Jerika Duncan from outside the courthouse, Jerika, thank you so much. We have more